Have you ever been doing well in your career and also knew that God still had something else for you? The fulfillment of a long term dream, something even bigger than the splendid work you had already done. How would you recognize the new opportunity or exercise the courage to move in a new direction? Today's guest faced these very questions and crossroads. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, and I'm your host for the Voice of Leadership and for Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership, the show for corporate executives who value a biblical perspective on life and leadership. Today's guest, Patricia Raybon, author of the Annalee Spain Mystery series, writes daring and exciting history mysteries. Her third novel in the series, Truth Be Told, was recently listed as a New York Times book review pick among four great fictional detectives. Her second in the series, Double the Lies, won the Christianity Today Book Award for Fiction, and her first book in the series, All That Is Secret, won a Christy Award for first novel and was selected by NBA All-Star Steph Curry as a Literati Book Club Selection. A writer of faith by day and mystery by night, Patricia Raybon also authors devotional writing for the publication Our Daily Bread. As an early career newspaper journalist, Patricia cut her writing teeth in high pressure newsrooms and won multiple awards for feature writing during her years at the Denver Post, where she was editor of the Sunday Contemporary magazine, and later at the Scripps Howard Rocky Mountain News. Mid career, she taught print journalism for 15 years to bright graduate and undergraduate students at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Publishers of Patricia's personal essays include the New York Times Magazine, Newsweek, USA Today, USA Weekend, Guidepost, In Touch Magazine, Christianity Today, The Washington Post, and National Public Radio's Weekend Edition. A lifetime Colorado resident, Patricia lives near Denver with her husband, who is a retired educator. Together with two grown daughters and five grandchildren, they enjoy movies, popcorn, college hoops, and masterpiece theater, historical mysteries on PBS. They also love spoiling their grand dog Max and grand little kitty Mittens. So, welcome, Patricia, to the Voice of Leadership and to Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership. I'm so delighted to have you here with me today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a total joy to spend this afternoon with you today. Thank you.
Well, I am so glad that you're here, and I can't wait for people to hear all about your story and your journey along the way. So, let me just ask, because I've been talking about all of the accolades that you have in your fiction writing. And what I want to unpack a little bit is that prior to writing fiction, you also wrote nonfiction books. So tell us about how you went from journalism to writing the nonfiction books, and what was one of your more interesting nonfiction projects?
Well, I appreciate the question because I love the answer. And you're right. I started in the newsroom on the city desk at the Denver Post. And one day, after being there, a couple of years after graduating from journalism school, there was a notice on the bulletin board announcing a position in the features department of the newspaper. And for those who are not familiar, that's what we used to call the human interest department. You probably heard this phrase that little hinges open big doors. And I think about this, Dr. Karen, every time I share this story, that I stood there in that newsroom, that busy newsroom with people coming and going, and had a small moment to decide if I would put my name in for that position. I did. I wanted to move up in my career, and I literally went upstairs to the features department. And I went from writing facts to writing about feelings. I describe it that way because I didn't know that years later I would be writing narrative nonfiction and the novels that you mentioned. At the time, I did not know that those long Sunday page one articles that we were writing would be a foundation for the writing that I would do later. I love that when I look back on myself at that young age, I love that I dared to take a chance and try something new. And that new thing ended up informing and inspiring all the writing that I have done ever since.
Well, that's a very beautiful beginning. And I'm very much a firm believer that everything that's happened to us in the past is working for us and will be used for what's coming down the pike next. And you mentioned that it did take some courage and some daring to take a different step, and yet you were still in the news world. You were just going into a different phase of the news world, where in fact now you were going to be talking more about emotions and emotion-based kinds of stories, as if you will. So let me ask this. You had to take some other leaps even a little bit later, like when, let's say you decided to, take the call to action to be in academia. So how did you even take that leap, and what more did you end up having to do there?
Well, the newspaper landscape started to change in the 90s, and my newspaper was sold more than once. And so in the newsroom, people were leaving for other opportunities. And so I had the opportunity to, and was invited to put my name in for a position at the University of Colorado at Boulder on the tenure track. But you heard this phrase, publish or perish. And sort of in order to get tenure at a tier one university like the University of Colorado, I had to publish a book as part of my teaching requirements every year. I had already been publishing personal essays, which is another format that I love. But in order to get tenure, I needed to publish a book. And so I had one book in my spirit that I felt really called to write. And it was, I wanted to write a reflection on making peace with white America. And I was called to that because, and I tell my age when I say this, but I grew up under Jim Crow segregation. I grew up before the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, those, the Voting Act, those profound civil rights pieces of legislation. And so I personally had this experience with not having civil rights. And I needed to, but I'm a woman of faith. I think of myself that way. And so I needed to sort that all out. And so I sat down and wrote this book and immediately found a publisher for it, a Viking Penguin publisher. My dean at the time said, you are not going to get tenure with this in the School of Journalism with this book. He said it wasn't centered enough around the discipline, which is news reporting and news journalism. And I ended up on the Today Show with that book, and I got tenure. I share that not to boast, as the Apostle Paul would say, but this is what I tell students when I'm teaching at workshops, that if your life has poured, and if the Lord has poured something into your life and into your experience, and you want to explore it, when I started writing this book, I didn't have the answers. I just wanted to explore the area and felt called to do that. And so what I tell young writers is that if you've been called, if your story has been called up for you to write it, answer the call. That's what the word vocation, that is means, that's speaking into our life's calling. And so answer it and sit down and write it. And so my young Patricia, again, when I look back on, on those years, Dr. Karen, I'm so grateful that I found the courage to respond and write the story that I felt needed to be written. That ended up with, for me, in the academy with tenure. And I stayed almost 16 years at the University of Colorado, teaching wonderful students who still track me down on Facebook and other places.
I think that is a fabulous story. And the reason I love it is because you really had a vision to do something and you were being discouraged about it. People didn't like the subject and they said it wasn't going to get you where you wanted to go. You weren't going to get tenure. This was pronounced. And so you went ahead and did it anyway. So I want you to talk about a couple things. What was it that caused you to proceed even with the naysayers? And I want you to think about the people who are out there now who God may be calling to step up and to do something a little different that other people aren't supporting. Maybe the people even close to them, their family, the spouse, their children, their colleagues, their neighbors are saying, what you're trying to do doesn't make sense. You have a good job, you're doing well. Why mess it up? So people are in those scenarios. What would you say? What did you do and what would you say to them?
Well, the answer to that really is connected with what writing is, and we may talk about that a little bit later. The best writing comes from the places that scare us the most. I could have been afraid because at the university, I was hired out of the newsroom with 3 or 4 other people with master's degrees, but none of us had PhDs. And we're talking, and as I said earlier, we're talking about a tier 1 university, and that's the terminal degree. I didn't have that. And I was trying to navigate this landscape with what looked like on paper, not full credentials. And so I did not need to ask myself to follow the standard path to get to where I wanted to go. The standard path with someone with a PhD would have been to do an empirical study of research and write that up and then see if I could get somebody to publish that as a book. That wasn't how I was prepared or wired. So I had to go someplace else in my life experience to find a way to find an open door. Years earlier in the newsroom, I had been given an opportunity to focus on and polish this narrative writing that this book employs. Dr. Karen, when I went up to the features department in the newsroom, it was at a time when there was great popularity in the news business around what was called long form journalism. And so instead of writing these 5-inch news stories that I'd written in the newsroom about a fire or a car accident or something on the interstate or something like that, these were long, reflective pieces about things that people were wrestling with. I remember writing a feature called Grandmothers Too Soon about women who had had children in their 13, 14, in their early teens. And now their children were having children. And they weren't yet 38, 40 years old. And so to write a story like that requires truth and courage and reflection. And this long form journalism encouraged that. That's what I could bring to the table. And that's the kind of book that I wrote. To answer your question, by paying attention to what I had to work with, brought me to my goal, which was to get tenure, but also led me to speak to people all over the world by deciding I'm going to work with what I've got and see how God uses it.
So you had your own unique set of experiences prior to this opportunity, and you had already been using courage, I guess I would say, to step up and write these stories. And so it reminds me of David. David says, I fought the bear, I fought the lion. So, fighting this Goliath is just not going to be a big deal because I've already met the enemy and managed to prevail because God is with me in
Yes,
essence. And so you're saying you looked in and said, I've got these experiences. I have a certain gifting. I don't have to take the same path as someone else in order to get there. In fact, sometimes if we take the wrong path that's not in accordance with our giftings, we ensure that we won't get there because we don't have those gifts that are on that other side. And it's just not always one way or one answer, is what I find.
yes. And I also have to credit my parents and the places where I grew up. I did grow up in the church, but in the church where we went every Sunday and many other days of the week, I learned stories about David and Goliath. And, you know, I learned the narratives, how God works with what looks, does his best work with what looks impossible. And so I had that in my mind, that very deeply embedded, the truth, how God works in the lives of people who know him and trust him. And as those of us who love the Bible and read those stories, we know the ways of God are not typical, they're not usual. And so we may find ourselves in our humble lives stepping out to do something that doesn't look like it should work. But as we listen to where the Lord is leading us and take the chance, my experience is that so often He is in that. And that certainly was my experience those days at the university of trying to find my place in a space where I was the non traditional scholar.
Yeah, I love that. And many of the people who are executives in their corporate workspaces, they're going to be non-traditional and different as well. And especially because many are Christian executives who are in secular workplaces. And what I hear you saying is remember, there's the supernatural part, there's the God part, and he's going to do things sometimes in ways that are not the typical way. Look at how he's led you and guided you, what experiences he's given you already. Look at the gifts in your life that he's already put in there, and let him lead you to the path, kind of like Gideon getting down to 300 men against more than 100,000 of the enemy men that he had to fight against. And yet, he was victorious because that was the path that God had selected for him. So in your story, you're just confirming that just because no one sees it doesn't mean that it's not to be.
It inspired and it inspired my students. They were so thrilled to see how the kind of writing that I was encouraging them to attempt had such a long reach. And I respect straight, hard hitting journalistic writing. I was reading a story. I was just telling my husband, reading a news story today, and when I finished it, I thought that was really good reporting. But there are other ways to tell stories. And I had been sharing that with my students. And so they loved seeing how this other way could end up with something that had currency and a value, what could take you places you hadn't expected to go. So I encourage those who may be listening to this today to look at their own asset. My sister's a licensed clinical psychologist, and she always says, no matter what, don't forget to check your own assets. What do you have that may be very unique to you? Tap into that and get going and use it.
Absolutely. I mean, you know that I'm a big proponent of the whole notion of using your creative advantage because your creative advantage is uniquely
Oh,
yours and you, and no one can copy that because you're not following a formula. You're following how God has wired you. And I hope that if people hear nothing else, they certainly hear that. and how God used your nonfiction writing to actually open some doors. You were even on the Today Show. So that was a whole era going from the news writing to the nonfiction writing that was a little more personal, a little more emotional and hard hitting, but you even practiced on the news side as well. And then we fast forward a little bit and we get to the fiction writing. And I want to ask a little bit about that in the history of the fiction writing, because when did that passion start? Were you writing fiction in childhood? Was it something you came to later in adulthood? What's the history behind the fiction writing and then the genre of the historical mysteries?
Well, I love fiction. I always have, even as a young child. I studied it a lot too. I have in my humble home library just dozens of books on the craft of fiction writing. But also in my faith life, I watched Jesus teach with parables. One could, I suppose, in some context, describe those stories as fictional. And I think about, him saying, there was a certain man who had two sons. Now that we recognize that as the parable of the prodigal son. If that kind of storytelling was good enough for Jesus, it had to be good enough for me. And so I had been reading up for years about the craft, and I still am. But then we had the pandemic. We were all isolated, and I said to my husband, I can either sit here and watch the news every day, which was very disheartening because the pandemic was deadly and global. I had gotten into that routine of just watching and watching and looking at it. And I said to Dan, I can watch that every day. Or what if I tried to finish that mystery novel that I've been thinking about all these years and see if I can finish it? And I did finish it, and I have an agent, and I contacted him one day. He agented my nonfiction writing. And I said, guess what, Greg? I have written a murder mystery. And would you represent it? And he said, send it to me. And very soon he wrote back and said, I really like this. And he sold it right away to one of the Christian publishers, Tyndale House. And then they came back and said, we really like this. Can you turn this into a series? That was in 2020. So in the course of that, now there are 3 novels published in that series. The first one you mentioned, Steph Curry recommended All That Is Secret. This is the Annalee Spain Mystery series. And the second one is called Double the Lies. And I'm thinking about this now. I'm holding up real books that didn't exist, 4 years ago. And a third book was released this year, the one that the New York Times gave such a lovely review on, called Truth Be Told. And so that movement that you asked me about, from nonfiction to novels, really set during that pandemic time. That was my pandemic project. A lot of people had pandemic projects, and that was mine. And I'll say it this way, Dr. Karen, that was for the world, such an encounter with death. Writing a novel can feel scary and frightening. You don't know if people will like it, will it come out and anybody be interested in it? But I said to myself, there's nothing scarier than this pandemic. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to work on these mysteries. I love the genre. I love what the murder mystery invites readers to think about. And not only actual death, but metaphorical death and all the ways, you can kill the spirit. That's what the New York Times talked about my books. This is a series that recognizes there are a lot of ways that a person can be killed off, in their spirit, in their hopes. And this is a series that's threading that needle. Very nice. So I'm not going to be afraid to try this new thing.
Well, this is so interesting because a lot of people, as you know, did veg in front of the TV for the whole pandemic and gained their 15 to 20 pounds or whatever it was. And you said, okay, this is a gift. I'm going to use this time. And that's the way I think too. And I had my little pandemic projects and things that I was working on. I was like, ooh, I'm off the road. I can do some stuff. And you said, I started thinking about this years ago. How long ago had it been that you started even developing this novel idea? When was that?
It was a good 10 years. And I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but during those 10 years, I was working, I was writing. I started, I'm a regular contributor at Our Daily Bread Ministries. And so I was writing for Our Daily Bread and doing other freelancing. And, but I always kind of had my hand in the idea of writing a mystery novel because I do love the genre. And I love the clergy mysteries, especially where there's a clergy person who's the detective. My protagonist is a young theologian who comes home to Colorado to solve the cold case murder of her estranged father. That's the first book. Honestly, answer your question, it was a good 10 years, and that was kind of, percolating, marinating. And that was time to put it on paper. And so I came late in life to this format, to the fictional format, which is very, very different from nonfiction writing. It requires just much more than I had ever been demanded in any nonfiction work that I'd ever done. But I challenged myself to not afraid. I love how Jesus said, on the on the ship in the storm, why are you afraid? I'm here. And so I tried it, and here we are.
And there really are very few people that are both nonfiction writers and fiction writers and really good at both. And in a very short period of time, you really established yourself with the fiction works, and they have gotten critical acclaim so far. And it didn't matter that one was waiting in the wings to finally be birthed. It's like a diamond. You put it in the drawer wherever you might have it, and it's still a beautiful diamond whenever you pull it out, and it still has value. And in fact, the value might have increased over time. And so that's how I see what you're doing. And so sometimes we may not get to something today. It doesn't mean that we won't finish it or get to it tomorrow. And so I really like that idea that's, oh, since I didn't do it in 10 years, that's it. It's over. No, it's not necessarily over. And you kept the flame burning, and at the right time, you just kind of like stoked the fire and let the flame, take over.
Yeah, there's a young man of God, a young pastor who I heard say, release the gift, and then see what God will do with it. It's very easy to convince ourselves that we should never take that thing out of the drawer where it's sitting. Give it our best to polish it up and then release it. I'm sure there are unfinished novels in people's desk drawers all over, countless. I had no idea what the reaction to this mystery series would be. None, no idea. But I wouldn't find out unless I released it to hear what people would say.
Hi, this is Dr. Karen dropping into today's show to remind you that one of the most important roles of an executive leader is to quickly make big and right decisions for the business. Are you looking for an experienced, and trusted advisor to come alongside you as a thinking partner as you make those decisions, then contact me at Dr. Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Now, back to the show. It's interesting you talk about releasing the gift, and I'm thinking about Paul talking to Timothy and talking about stir up the gift. And that's kind of what you were doing too. You're kind of stirring it up and saying, okay, what can I make out of this? There's some ingredients in here, and we're going to make something really good, like a great stew out of it. you know? And so that's what I also see going on in your case. So tell us a little bit then about who the audience is for the mystery books and how did you discover this audience and how important is it to know your audience?
Any kind of creative work, I'm sure the creative person wants everybody to be in the audience. They want everybody to come see their movie, everybody to see their play, everybody to read their novel. But the truth is, there is a core audience for anything creative like this. I didn't know until I started doing book signings at the Barnes and Noble stores in Colorado, and that my core audience are women, number one, of a certain age, similar to me, who probably have had some experience of faith. When I would go to book signings, or when someone would contact me and said, "We're reading your novel, and we live, in another state. Can we connect on Zoom?" And of course, at that point, we all knew how to use Zoom, and so I said yes. And then when we get on the call, and everybody would turn on their cameras, and there was my core audience, women of a certain age who had a narrative or a life story related to faith. And I saw it time and time and time again. And I finally said, "This is my audience." And I love the fact that they were enjoying this. The series is it's historical fiction set in the 1920s, and with the protagonist of color who's trying to solve mysteries in a hostile time, while also asking God to heal her hurt and heal her confusion and heal her heart around certain things. And so, like me, these same people understood what it feels like to be in a world that sees you in a hostile way. And so I had to sit with that a minute, Dr. Karen, because in the world of uh, popular culture, the important audience, people say, are young. You want to make sure that you hit, Gen Z and all these other demographics. But that wasn't my core audience. And then as I thought about it, I thought, wait a minute, these are people who have life, they have experience, they have time, and in a lot of cases, they have the money to buy these books. And so I say all that with great gratitude that then helped me to honor the people who were enjoying the books the most and were not reading just book one, but book two. I can't wait to book three, and then reading book three. I can't wait to book four. I feel now very humbled by the excitement of this core audience to enjoy the stories that I've been blessed to write.
I love the way that you've unpacked this core audience and that now that you know who they are, you are happy to continue to write for them, knowing that other people will also read the books as well. It won't stop anybody else who's not in the core audience from also benefiting. And, I think in our marketing world today, there's not enough understanding of this concept. There are even clothing manufacturers, for example, that have made business clothing for women for years. And I'm in that older demographic, and they've kind of forgotten that some of us are still in the workplace, and they started shifting what they're making for such a younger demographic. And there's no way in life I could wear it. The thing is all the way up the rear end and everything else, and I wouldn't wear anything like that. And yet they've made high quality, wonderful clothes for years for a more, let's say, traditional businesswoman. And so I think that sometimes when people get off center a little, they're going to lose a lot of business too, because I'm in the demographic that can afford these things. And so they forget that,
Yeah.
they forget that that's the case, and what's really going on out there. So I'm really glad that you've dialed that in. So now, since you are also writing still in the nonfiction area with Our Daily Bread, the devotional, tell us how you source topics for Our Daily Bread and how that audience is different or the same from the fiction audience.
Okay, I do want to answer that question. And if I may, just
Mm-hmm.
say one other thing about audience,
Sure.
because it is so important. My first novel, before it was released, I had a meeting with the digital sales manager at my publishing house. And we were talking about how at the publishing house there are fiction authors in the Tyndale Fiction Division who have massive success. Their books sell in the millions, and everybody's excited about that and loves that. And then he said, Patricia, then we have another level of author, and those are authors who remember to honor the hometown crowd. And he said, you have written a Colorado mystery. They're all set in Colorado. And he said, the first thing you will want to do is connect with people in your state and with that hometown group. He said, then when you get traction there, you will start to see people in a lot of other places pay attention and start to get interested. It turned out to be excellent advice. And so instead of me trying to, reach people in New York City or here and there, I focused at first on readers in Colorado. And I called when he told me that, Dr. Karen, I got off the Zoom call and I started sending email to bookstores, every bookstore I could find in Metro Denver and beyond in the state. It can feel like going small. I was reading, Zechariah, that reminder that the angel of the Lord says to him, don't dare to despise the days of small beginnings. Don't despise those things. God is in that. And then he cites the Lord. He says, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit. And so you do the small things well in small places well. And then however that's supposed to get expanded and grow, then God will take care of that first. But I need to be faithful first in my one state. Colorado's not a large, in terms of population, not a large state. But I was challenged to honor that audience first. And that's where I started to identify this core audience that I would see. When I first went to a Barnes and Noble, they didn't know me. They weren't planning to carry my books. Now they're in every Barnes and Noble in Colorado and beyond. But I had to start there first in the small place, like as you were saying with Gideon, and take my old 300 and let God multiply and make it more.
I actually love this story because you're talking about starting at home. You're talking about putting that pebble in the pond and having the ripple effect from home, because people in Colorado know people in other places, in other states, and there are other communities that are similar to Colorado, even though they're not Colorado. And then the bigger themes will still appeal to other people, because death and murder and, the loss of dreams and all that stuff. That's relevant for everyone ultimately, but you got to start with that core. And so thank you for sharing more of that story and how you ended up not despising the small start, knowing that it was
Yeah.
building, to something else. God would bless it and do more with it.
Yes, yes. And in terms of our Daily Bread Ministries, was invited by one of the longtime writers there. In fact, she's now co-host one of their radio programs. And Elisa Morgan is her name. And she asked me would I be interested in putting my name in as a regular contributor. And I said, yes. And it was a process. I had to submit, I think, 6 or 8 devotionals. And over the course of a year, they were vetted because our Daily Bread is a global ministry. And so editors from all over the world read everything that is ever released from our Daily Bread. They have whatever's written has to not just appeal to an American audience, but to believers everywhere. And I remember telling a friend, and she said, "You want to, you want to write for our Daily Bread?" She was kind of suggesting that it was a small thing, because if you've ever seen the little devotional in print, it's a small little book. I said yes to it. I have been blessed. I just can't tell you how much I love the work that I do. Keeps me in the Word every day. Writing is about 2 things. It's about truth. It's about courage. And if you know your truth and have the courage to put it on paper, that's writing. And so I look around in terms of topics. I look around for things that happen in life. And very often I'll say to my husband, I can write a devotional on that. I see the takeaway. And so that's how I approach it. And it keeps me staying alert all the time to what's happening around me. And whether it's on my block or in my family or in something I see traveling or at the grocery store or in my reading. I was reading something just the other day by a man who designs keyboards and websites. And he said, do you know that the most used button on the keyboard is the back button? When I read that, Dr. Karen, I thought, I can write a devotional about that. I don't know. I haven't yet found the scripture that goes with that. But it's just a small idea that I think there's a takeaway in. And then I asked the Lord to show me how to use it in a devotional reflection. And I love the work, and I'm grateful to be one small voice at the table at that ministry.
People who are in the Christian world, they know that Tyndale House is a huge publisher. They also know a major publisher of Christian authors and major Christian works. And they also know that Our Daily Bread is big and huge. And most churches will even carry copies of the Daily Bread in their foyer of their church building, and people subscribe to it, as you said, worldwide. So your accomplishments and how you've been recognized and the doors that have opened and the opportunities that you've had are not minor. And everybody knows New York Times and all these other things are big deals too. When God opens doors, sometimes he does it in a big way. And that's certainly what I see in your case.
I'm surprised every day that there's an opportunity to do this. Our Daily Bread actually reaches more people than Tyndale House. Our Daily Bread reaches something like 60 million people every month all over the world. I'll get an email from China or all places. I saw your devotional today in Our Daily Bread, and it just seemed to just the right thing that touched me. I'm so surprised by that. And so I think, Dr. Karen, about this writer friend who was suggesting that opportunity wasn't important enough, but it's turned out to be just amazing way for me in this humble work that I do, this writing work, to reach people for the Lord everywhere. That's just just an amazing thing. And it's also so humbling because I know it has nothing to do with me and everything to do with him.
And it means you have to be tuned in, as you were saying. You're tuned into what's going on around you. You're tuned into the voice of God and what He's saying to you every day through prayer and the scriptures and so on. And the little nuggets that He gives you is little seeds that, oh, I could write something about that, because it's very similar to what I have to do very often when I'm thinking about my solo podcast. And sometimes they're just about a slice of life and something that I've seen or I've experienced and that I think might help somebody or might benefit someone. So it's a very similar process to what you just described and what you were just talking about right now. So let me ask this, Patricia. We know that there's some people who love to read fiction and they've been doing it forever and for whatever, and that's their thing. I want you to talk a little bit about what those people will get from reading this series. And I also want you to talk about the crossover readers, those who are maybe more nonfiction readers, and yet there's still something in your books for them too. So talk about both the ones who normally read fiction and the ones who read nonfiction.
When we go to a new place, we always encounter a new way of looking at things and learning things and seeing things. Not everybody's a fiction reader, but for those who are willing to go there, they may open the book and a book and or one of my stories and say, "Oh my goodness, this is my story," or look what God is teaching in this. So it's a challenge for all of us to offer ourselves and see what we learn when we go that route.
Okay, so this is the challenge to all of you out there, whether you are regular fiction readers or nonfiction. See what the message is in there that is for you, because there's probably something in there for all of us, is what I'm going to say about it. Now, Patricia, some people who are listening, they may also, want to author a book, perhaps. So, what is one thing that many people don't know about writing for publication?
They don't know what writing is. And I mentioned earlier that writing is not information. It's not taking information, putting that on a page. That's not writing. Writing, I get to say it twice in this conversation, is about knowing the truth that you know and having the courage to say it. I used to tell my students, the police are not going to come get you. I don't think. But write it down first. I spoke at a high school one time, and a young lady raised her hand and said, "What if everybody's telling me that I shouldn't write something?" And so I said to her, "Sit down and write it, and then see what you learn from doing that work. And then share it with the people who said to you, don't write it, and see if it feels differently to them. But you won't know unless you sit down and put it on paper."
And that's really risky in and of itself, because sometimes people do write something, they put it on paper, and then they learn that was really for them and not for the public. And so that can happen too.
Right. But you won't know unless you sit down and do the work. That's the only way to find out.
Yeah. So write and discover.
That's right. Writing is discovery.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't mean to speak over you, but writing is discovery. That's why the first draft, I was talking to my husband, I just submitted the first draft for my next novel. I'm excited to get the feedback because I know that writing is revision. It's in the revision that the writer discovers what the writing is trying to take you and where it's trying to lead you.
I love that. So don't be too rigid, be open. to, to the possibilities as you go along. What else would you say is some of your best advice and counsel for people who do want to write a book? What else would you offer to them as best practices or just things they should know?
Don't go it alone. Find a writing workshop, a conference, at least invest at least in one writing conference a year. And the reason why that's so effective is because in one place, you're going to meet editors, publishers, agents, writing coaches, authors who are maybe writing the kind of books that you want to write. And so it's cutting through a lot of time and self energy to take ourselves to one of those kinds of settings. And then in that community, in that writing community, you have the opportunity to meet the people who may be looking for the kind of book that you've written. The smartest thing, I'm getting ready to, I just said yes to speaking at what's called Publishing in Color. And it's a conference that's virtual now, twice a year for aspiring writers of color who want to introduce their ideas and their work to Christian publishers. That's just one opportunity. There are many, many like that all over the country. Google is our friend a lot of times, and just Google them and see when's the next writing conference that you may want to go to. I have a friend whose daughter-in-law writes fantasy, and that was my advice to her, to go to a conference where they're talking about writing fantasy novels. And she just got so much help and found a publisher. So don't go it alone. It's solo work, and so much of it is solo work anyway. So get yourself into a community of other writers, and you'll just learn so much about the industry, about the kind of writing that you want to do, how you can get better at it, who might be interested in it. And you make writing friends in this network that can be just a great help and a great support.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad you mentioned that because so often people just think they have to hide under a rock, and this is not the time to hide. You need to make contact with others and connections and learn things along the way. And so you have to get out of the house, so to speak, to do some of that connecting with other people. So you've already mentioned that people can find your books at Barnes and Noble. Where else can they find your books, and how can they get a hold of you?
I'm grateful to say that the publisher has made the books available at Amazon, national chains like Barnes and Noble, and independent bookstores. But what's exciting is that they're in all formats. So hardcover, softcover, Audible, they're on Kindle, and they're on Nook. And then they recently found them in what's called a library binding with large print. So isn't that nice? I mean, there's in all
It's
these ways
wonderful.
that you can find these mysteries novels. The other thing is, I'd love for people to stay in touch with me by signing up for my newsletter on my website, patriciaraybon.com, and then on my contact page on my website for people who might want to invite me to their book club or to a speaking opportunity. That's the place to send me a little note. And I just put a note on it that says, and I will do my best to get back to you soon.
Okay, so say the website again where people can reach you if they want to invite you for a speaking engagement, they want to do a book signing or tour or some other wonderful connection.
PatriciaRaybon.com.
And Raybon is spelled?
Raybon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So now you've given a lot of wisdom in this conversation so far today. And so I'm going to ask you, what additional words of wisdom do you want to share with my community of corporate executives? And most of these are Christians in secular settings. What would you share with them that you haven't maybe said yet?
I would send them to Galatians chapter 6, I believe it is verse 4. I share it because in the world, it's possible to be distracted by other people and their success that they're having and how well they're doing. But this verse says, yes, 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 but pay careful attention to your own work. And then you will have the satisfaction of a job well done, and you won't have to compare yourself to anybody else. Now, that's the New Living Translation, and I am so blessed by it. I think about it, it seems like at least once every day, that particular scripture. So I invite people to look it up and let it be a blessing.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Patricia. And thank you for the spiritual blessing part as well. And I hope people will meditate on that scripture as they think about what's next for them, focusing on their work, the work that God has given them in their hands to do. So thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it so much.
I am so delighted. And I have another verse for people to think about as well. So you get a double bonus today, 2 different verses. So this one comes from Proverbs, the 15th chapter, and it's verse 23. And it says, "A man has joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season. How good it is." And we've been talking today with Patricia about the due season. And there are many due seasons that come time after time. It's not just one. So keep alert, keep your eyes open for what God has in mind for you to say and for you to do today and the next day. All right, have a blessed day, and I'll see you next time. Hi, it's Dr. Karen here today, and I want to tell you a little bit about Spirit Wings Kids Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and it's an organization that provides profound services for orphans and for widows and families across the globe in many ways, and especially in the country of Uganda. So today I'm speaking with Donna Johnson, who is the founder of Spirit Wings Kids and also a board member. Donna, tell us about some example of the profound work that you're doing in Uganda.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Karen. We were just there a few weeks ago, and it's incredible. It's more than an orphanage. We have a soccer academy that keeps the boys off the street. We have a widows program that matches them with children. And it's just a thriving network of really entrepreneurs. And it's just been such a meaningful blessing to see the work that we're doing there.
You know what, Donna, what I love about what you said just now is you're really talking about their whole lives. You're creating families between the widows and the children, and you're also making sure they have recreation and something to do with the soccer academy. And you're looking at the job situation and the entrepreneurial aspect. And as a businesswoman yourself who's very successful, you're right in line with being able to make that difference. Thank you so much for the difference that you're making. And I'm inviting everyone who's watching and listening today to go to swkids.foundation and donate now. 100% of everything you donate goes to those people who are in need and who are receiving those services. Thank you so much for donating. And Donna, thank you for this ministry. You've been listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. And I want to give a special thanks to jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan for granting us permission to use his gifted music on our show. Thanks for listening, and remember to go to my website, transleadership.com, for more strategies, insights, and leadership resources.